Hello and good afternoon. My name is Timothy O'Brien with the Great Lakes Science Center. Today I'll be presenting on the status of offshore preyfish in Lake Huron. I'd just like to thank my co-authors for their contributions, Daryl Hondorp, Ed Roseman, and Peter Esselman. Preyfish are important to the Great Lakes for a number of different reasons. First off, they provide food for economically valuable piscivores. So these are species that are part of both sport and commercial fisheries. They also represent opportunities for commercial harvest themselves, certainly with some of our cragganine species. As juveniles, they are forage or part of the prey base. And also, we consider them to be part of a healthy Great Lakes ecosystem in terms of how the ecosystem is functioning. And in particular, thinking about energy transfer to higher trophic levels, with prey fish serving as an intermediary. A recently funded project by the Great Lakes Fishery Commission and led by Tom Stewart illustrates this nicely. We can see preyfish here occupying sort of an intermediate position in the food web, kind of in this energy pyramid, trophic levels 3 and 4. And really just sort of illustrating here the importance of shuttling nutrients from algae, other benthic sources of energy up through the food chain and sort of serving in the intermediate between lower trophic levels and top predators. The USGS uses a couple different tools to assess preyfish populations in Lake Huron with the purpose to describe the spatial and temporal trends in relative abundance and species composition. So we have two different surveys. We have the bottom trawl survey, which is our benthic trawl, and then the acoustic and midwater trawl survey, which uses both sonar information from acoustics as well as midwater trawl catches to estimate the abundance of pelagic fishes. It's important to point out that these surveys do target, in some cases, different fish guilds or life stages. The bottom trawl is, as the name would imply, is best suited for demersal fish, so sculpins, round gobies, or semi-pelagic fish that are oriented on or near the bottom during daylight hours. The midwater trawl acoustic survey operates at night. We target pelagic fish that are distributed throughout the water column. They also cover different areas as well as time periods. The acoustic survey, with the exception of 2020, is a whole lake survey. So this covers all three basins of Lake Huron, including Georgian Bay and North Channel. And the bottom trawl survey is main basin only. However, this is our longest time series, now exceeding 4 decades in length. It's also important to point out that while we take information from both of these sources, we do not integrate these into a single index. Rather, we use these two survey results and that we consider them complementary to one another. USGS assessments looked quite a bit different in 2020, as they most likely did for any other agencies that were able to get out and do field work. We had no sampling in Canadian waters of Lake Huron in 2020, so this resulted in an acoustic survey with greatly reduced spatial scale as well as length. Now, our bottom trawl survey was nearly completed, with the exception of sampling off of Goderich, Ontario. So that was the one Canadian port we did not sample for the bottom trawl. This provides just an overview of what we were able to accomplish in 2020. We can see our standard bottom trawl locations at the ports of Detour, Hammond Bay, Alpena, Thunder Bay, East Tawas, Al Sabo Point here, and then Harbor Beach. Also, our acoustic transects, which are not fixed sites, like our bottom trawl, shown here in straight line segments, and then the midwater trawls in the triangles. So it gives you a nice overview of what we were able to accomplish in 2020. So today in this presentation, we're going to report on long-term shifts in species composition And for this, we're going to use the bottom trawl data. So as I mentioned, this does exceed 4 decades in length, the time series. So it's really nice for looking at these long-term trends. As far as spatial trends in abundance, we're going to rely on the acoustic survey for this. This is typically a whole lake. Of course, in 2020, we did not accomplish this and sample the entire lake, including Georgian Bay and North Channel. But the acoustic survey lends itself nicely to looking at how fish are distributed spatially. And then as far as trends in the abundance and composition of dominant species, um, since 2004, this is kind of a truncated time series that where the bottom trawl and the acoustic survey overlap. For bloater, rainbow smelt, and alewife, we're going to look at trends from both surveys overlaid on top of each other. Cisco, only from the acoustic survey, and then sculpin and round goby, these are from the bottom trawl survey only, as they are benthic species. So we'll dive right into the results here, beginning with bloater. And a number of these slides are going to be oriented in the same fashion. On the left side, these two plots are from the long-term bottom trawl survey. This is YAO biomass, and then young of year density. On the right-hand side, we have the truncated time series with the bottom trawl and the open circles, main basin acoustic blue circle, and then the acoustic whole lake, with the exception of 2020 in red. And these are mean biomass and then mean density. If we look at bloater, we see that throughout the first part of the bottom trawl time series, we had sort of a building up of these populations in Lake Huron. This followed by a steady decline through 2000, and then roughly a 10-year period where bloater populations were stable but fairly low relative to the past. And then we started seeing this uptick again, and especially in 2011, 2012. Generally, since around 2000, we have seen this increasing trend. Concurrent with that, we've also seen an increasing trend in young of year production, where we didn't see this in the past, even when bloater populations were abundant. Now we've generally seen an increasing trend in recruitment and production of young fish in recent years. Although, as you can see, it is highly variable. If we look at the bottom trawl and the acoustic surveys overlaid, looking at yearling and older biomass in the main basin, these track fairly well since 2004. A couple obvious outliers here, 2011 and 2012, the bottom trawl deviated pretty substantially here, but generally we see this increasing trend that tracks fairly well between the two surveys. A slight decrease in 2020. Recruitment or abundance of young year fish, which we often use as a recruitment index, a little bit more variable, a little bit less in harmony than the yearling and older time series, but generally an increasing trend that we've seen in recruitment, although quite a substantial drop in 2020. Highly variable, as you can see. Some years very low, other years some decent year class is produced. Looking at the distribution of bloater biomass, in 2020, most of this was in the northern portion of the western main basin. We also saw some in the central and south, but predominantly in the north. Looking at size distributions, fairly similar between the two surveys. Unusual in that the bottom trawl typically has a slightly larger distribution, whereas the midwater trawl will pick up smaller fish here, sort of in the recruit stage. We don't see that in 2020, an absence of small fish, generally what appears to be a poor year class for bloater in 2020. Looking at rainbow smelt, similar, we saw high abundance through the 1990s, through 1990, and then a sort of a steady decline through 2000. Since then, it has been declining, but it's been fairly stable for yearling and older. Like bloater, we've also started to see some more recruitment where we haven't in the past, possibly due to density dependence and cannibalism within these populations. However, this recruitment has not really resulted in any buildup of the spawning stock or the yearling and older biomass. The two surveys tracked fairly well. Typically, we see though that the bottom trawl is estimating uh, higher abundance in the main basin in number of years here. Generally, the trends track fairly well in recent years. And then the red line there being the acoustic whole lake also accounts for the North Channel. The North Channel is a big smelt producer. Looking at young of year, this tracks fairly well with the exception of these early 2004 through 2008, 2007, and a couple of years here. Other than that, the young of year index in the main basin tracks fairly well. In 2020, most of rainbow smelt were centrally located and more to the south in the main basin. Size distributions between the two surveys were nearly identical. We did see a little bit of a bimodal distribution indicating some recruitment here, but this is uh, very low levels, and in fact, a pretty sharp decline in the number of YOY fish in 2020. But these two distributions do overlay pretty well. Alewife is a familiar story for many. Beginning in around 2004, 2005, we saw alewife populations crash in Lake Huron. This has remained the same through time, through the last 15 years. We've also seen very little recruitment, very little production of young fish. A couple blips here, and we can sort of magnify this on the abridged time series here from 2004 onward. Generally, the bottom trawl survey tends to pick up more alewife. We can see that here in some of these years, and as well as young of year fish. We do pick these up in the acoustic survey, but they are fairly dispersed and very low numbers. Regardless, all of this, a couple years here of YOY production has not led to any increase in yearling and older biomass in Lake Huron. As far as alewife distribution went in 2020, we did capture very few. We see some here located outside of Thunder Bay. This has been a pattern for the last couple years where we've seen alewife, small alewife in this vicinity of Lake Huron. The size of these fish was incredibly small. Some of these were barely 30 millimeters. They did get up to around 100 millimeters when you include the bottom trawl, but all of these fish were age 0. Now just looking at trends in Cisco distribution. I'm not showing the Cisco abundance plot here, but just generally where these fish are distributed. And just to point out, these are 200 millimeters or larger. So these are what we would consider adult Cisco that are found foraging in the thermocline during late summer. And again, this is all from the acoustic survey. Between 2007 and 2020, this is what Cisco distribution looks like. Really, primarily Georgian Bay, North Channel, and the northern rim here of the main basin along south of Manitoulin Island, off of Tobermory here, and also south of the Lake Chanot is where we see most of the Cisco distribution. Finishing up here with sculpins and round goby from the bottom trawl survey. If we look at the native sculpin species, and keep in mind slimy sculpin here are magnified by 100 to be on the same scale as deep water, we saw a similar pattern with our native benthic species. Right around 2004, 2005, we started seeing pretty sharp declines here. And really for the last 15 years or so, this has been the case. We've seen some increases here and there, but it's very sporadic. And generally, our native benthic species, including trout perch, nine-spine stickleback, and our sculpins here, have been at record low abundance for over a decade. Round goby, also shown here in 2020, appears to be a record low for the bottom trawl time series. Again, highly variable catches of this fish. A lot of efforts underway to try and track these populations better and estimate abundance. So if we look at composition of species, this is from the acoustic survey, and this is the main basin. Generally, since 2004, we've seen this increase in biomass. Keep in mind, though, that it is dominated by bloater, in 2020 being no exception. 80% bloater, rainbow smelt less than 10%, Cisco, and a few other species making up other very small portion of this. Sort of a similar picture for the bottom trawl survey. Again, here since around 2005, we've been at sort of this reduced level of biomass. It's been fairly stable. We've seen a couple jumps up here in bloater and in more recent years, but generally we're in this sort of drawn out period, the last 15 years or so, where it's been, fairly low biomass. 2020, very similar to acoustics in the main basin, roughly 80% bloater, rainbow smelt, a slightly higher proportion, and other species making up the difference. And it's really important when we're talking about fish production and fish biomass in Lake Huron to put this into the context of some of these food web changes that we are aware of. So we know a few things. We know that total phosphorus in Lake Huron declined by roughly 50% between 1995 and 2003. This preceded a lot of pretty major changes in the fish community, as well as the zooplankton community. We know that phosphorus levels are currently stable, following a recent uptick, but still low. And phosphorus being an essential nutrient for algae growth is positively related to fish biomass. And so generally we've accepted that this decline in nutrients in Lake Huron means that less fish biomass can be produced. If we look at this simple sort of carrying capacity model here for a population, we know there's a lot of things that can affect K, certainly density dependent factors as well as density independent factors. But as Lake Huron becomes more P limited, certainly in the offshore environment, this certainly remains a possibility to see this shift occurring in this reduction in K. If we look at this relationship then between fish biomass and nutrients, what does this mean for Lake Huron? Well, this is sort of the tendency for Lake Huron currently. We're in a position with low nutrients and as a result, low fish biomass. So just to conclude, offshore preyfish biomass in 2020 continued to be dominated by rainbow smelt and bloater. We had continued low biomass of alewife, low density recruitment measured during 2020. It's important to point out that the effect of the reduced spatial scale of our surveys, in particular the acoustic survey, on this YOI index is uncertain. Native benthic species still remain at low abundance. We've been reporting on this for a number of years. So where does this leave us then in terms of meeting our fish community objectives? In particular, our prey objective. Well, we know prey diversity continues to be low, and that this can lead to the potential for instability. We also know that native species are becoming more prominent in recent years. This is good in terms of bloater and Cisco, and there's hopes that the Cisco stocking program could increase diversity in the prey base. Keeping all this in mind, we do know, however, that the capacity for the system to support increased biomass is still a question, especially in light of these recent and major food web shifts and nutrient reductions to Lake Huron. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge the numerous individuals that make this work possible. A lot of our vessel staff listed here, our survey technicians, our IT support staff, really critical to getting this work done and to being able to present this information to our partners. Also, acknowledging U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for their contributions to the acoustic survey in Lake Huron. Thank you.